Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone. Hope you're doing well. We have a new member to our year, Mayor Frank. Welcome. Do you live in Baltimore?
Yeah, Randallstown.
Oh, okay.
Oh, nice.
Very good. Um, all right. Where do my controls go now? Let's get the source sheet up. And I know I got to zoom in some more. Okay. Hopefully that's good. All right. So we are in Parshat Pinchas. I want to again thank Avi for filling in last week. I had a great time at the beach. I heard the share was very good, very interesting. So thank you. And Parshat Pinchas, we're moving towards the end of Sefer Bamidbar. Pinchas, we've in previous years spoken about Pinchas, who the parsha is named for, who has the heroic intervention against the sinning Israelite and Midianite. Really, that intervention takes place at the very end of last week's parsha, and here we have Pinchas's reward for intervening. The parsha contains in it the story of Benot Slavchad, Slavchad's daughters, who petitioned Moshe to be allowed to inherit for their father, who only had daughters and no sons. Um, And I think in previous years we spoke about, are they feminist heroines or not feminist heroines, and how does that story fit in? But that's a very interesting, rich episode in our parsha. It has in its we actually read from Parsha Pinchas on every yontif. The Musaf sacrifices for each holiday are described in detail at the end of the parsha, and we're actually gonna tonight. I came across this really interesting comment from Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, but it's going to take us a couple minutes to get there. But it's based on the end of the parsha and the conclusion of the description of the Musaf. Right, the Musaf is the additional offering that was given for each holiday. We also have a Musaf offering for Rosh Chodesh, for Shabbos. And so when we daven Musaf in Shul, that is corresponding to days when there was a Musaf offering brought in the Beit HaMikdash. Um, so that's where we're going to pick up this evening. The beginning of this it's really two chapters in the Torah. The beginning is chapter 28. And actually, one of the really smart things that I benefited from in my Jewish education was they taught us how to read from the Torah in either fourth or fifth grade. They started teaching, and they
Oh,
made the decision that the first thing they were going to teach us was Rosh Chodesh. So that comes every month. So that's a good thing to teach people that are learning how to lane because they'll have most opportunities of anything else to read that. And so I know this. I feel like I know this section still very well. Um, so it opens, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, Sav et bnei Yisrael v'amarta lehem, et korbani lachmi leishai reach nichochi tishmeru lakriv li b'moado. God spoke to Moshe saying, command the Jewish people and say to them, um, my bread offering, for fire offering, for pleasant smell, you should observe to offer me in its proper time. And then we're given the commandment, the Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh is what's given first, and then it goes on to all the other holidays. The conclusion of this section, so now we're fast forwarding nearly two full chapters. The end of chapter 29 is as follows. Eila ta'asula Hashem b'moadechem levad, and Sukkot is the last holiday discussed, so it's really Shmini Atzeret, the Musaf offering of Shmini Atzeret that was just discussed. And then it concludes seemingly with Eila ta'asula Hashem b'moadechem, levad minidrechem v'nidvotechem, le'alotechem u'leminchotechem, le'niskechem u'leshalmechem. So this is what you should offer to God on holidays, in addition to your vow offerings, your voluntary offerings, your elevation offerings, your mincha offerings, your wine, your libation offerings, and your peace offerings. Right. So this is right. These are the Musaf offerings. These are additional offerings that are brought on the holidays. End of chapter 29. We then have beginning of chapter 30. Vayomer Moshe el bnei Yisrael kechol asher tzivah Hashem et Moshe. Moshe said to bnei Yisrael everything that God said to Moshe. And that ends Parshat Pinchas. Okay, so there's one interesting question which we've touched on, which is why does the Parsha end in chapter 30, verse 1, and why doesn't it end with chapter 29? Right, like, why was the division of the Parshiot not the same as the division of the chapters? So we know, historically speaking, that the chapter divisions were introduced by Christians at a much later point in history. I couldn't tell you what year it was or which Christian scholar or whoever did it, but we know that the chapter divisions were done by the Christians. So this is much later. Um, and why we accepted the Christian division of the chapters, that's a whole other story. I don't know. I'm just don't have that education to be able to speak about more than that, but it's interesting and curious that we universally accept I shouldn't say universally. 95% of the Jewish world accepts the Christian division. The only real dissent I'm familiar with is if you have a Koren Chumash. So the Koren Chumash has two chapter divisions. It has the Christian division, which is what everyone uses, and it has some other division. Again, I don't know the exact history, but what seems to be a more authentically Jewish division, um, and that's a really interesting thing to note. Um, but anyway, we have this curiosity that number one, our parsha ends with chapter 30, verse 1, rather than the end of chapter 29, right? So you could say just extend it, make chapter 29 40 verses instead of 39 verses. Why that division? But then also, if you look at the two final verses of our parsha, they seem to be somewhat redundant, right? Eila ta'asula Hashem b'moadechem levad minidrechem v'nidvotechem lelotechem leminchotechem, right? We already read that one, chapter 29, verse 39. This is what you should offer to God on your holidays in addition to all the other sacrifices that you bring. Vayomer Moshe b'nei Yisrael kachol asher tzivah Hashem et Moshe. Moshe told b'nei Yisrael everything God told Moshe. We have two conclusions, right? Each one of these could be a concluding verse in itself. So why the need for two concluding verses? That's our number one question. Everyone clear on that? Any thoughts or reactions to any of this? Again, I wish I knew the academic history better, but I don't. So
I popped some stuff in the chat from Gemini.
okay,
Stephen Langton, a
thank you.
Christian scholar and the Archbishop of Canterbury, created the system in 1205.
Hmm.
The first is Rabbi Shlomo ben Yishmael, apparently, who uses it in order to do debates, right? Because in order to debate, like
Right, right.
the comedians that just call out numbers. And then once it's printed, um, Bomberg publishes it. Yeah, because he's Christian, so he integrated the
Yeah,
Christian chapters.
yeah. Okay. So thank
It's
you, and I'm sure
simplified.
I'm
Still begs the
sure.
question, though, why didn't they include that last verse, or why'd they make the decision to stop it after, right,
Yeah,
before the Pasuk Aleph?
yeah.
Still a legit question.
Okay. And like in my mind, the best again, in my limited because I had a teacher that pointed this out to me, probably is why it's the best example. But at the very beginning of the Torah, one of the strongest examples of this is if you look in source number two, right? So this is at the very end of the story of creation, end of chapter 2 of Breshit. So it tells us, Vayushnehem arumim Adam v'ishto v'lo yitboshashu. They were naked, man, Adam and his wife, they were not ashamed. That's the end of chapter 2. And then chapter 3 opens Hanachash haya arum mikol chayat hasadeh asher asa Hashem Elokim vayomer Elisha afki, right? The snake, the serpent, the snake was the most sly of all the animals that God had created. So in the Koran, right? If you have a Koran Chumash, you'll see that there's some demarcation after chapter 2, verse 25, indicating that there should be a break, right? Sorry, before verse 25, right? In the Koran division, chapter 2 really begins with verse 20. Chapter 3 begins with verse 25 of chapter 2. Right? So then it becomes a whole, not just an interesting curiosity, but a real theological debate. Does the story of the Garden of Gan Eden begin with the focus on Adam and Chava are naked, or does it begin with the Nachash, with the snake? So in a Christian read of the Bible, it's going to begin with the snake because, right, the original sin and all that stuff. And so it makes sense that they would begin with a new chapter with the snake. But if it's a story of humanity and humankind, so it would make much more sense to begin with the description of the state of humans at the beginning of this episode. And so that these divisions do have some significance, and it just again emphasizes the question, why did we accept the Christian division? And it could just be the reality of printing presses, and that's just there was no other choice. Yeah, Aaron, you're muted.
Rabbi, but
Yeah,
the other thing is the pay
yeah,
in the text,
right.
right? Which we talked a little bit about pays and samachs last week, but clearly in the Bamidbar section,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of makes sense why the pay is there, right? From a context perspective, right? That which includes Kechol Asher Tzivah Hashem et Moshe. But in the Breshit section, there's no pay anywhere here.
Right,
That is all
right.
one continuous description of Gan Eden, right?
Yeah,
I mean, does anybody know when the pays started showing up?
I don't. I bet Chat GPT could tell us that also.
That's a
Because,
challenge I'll take.
but I mean, like you point out, the story of Gan Eden should be one continuous saga. It shouldn't, the
Yeah,
Nachash is just part of the story, not a story necessarily of himself.
yeah. So then, why is there no pay? I don't know. That might stump Chat also. That might be a job for Claude. I don't know.
Because
Um,
I just looked in the Chumash, there's no pay for
yeah,
the entire chapter.
right. Okay, so
So,
that anyway, that's our basic question.
By the way, the Pez and the Samech, I think it's like here it's saying Masoretic scholars.
so
Um,
that's
that's a
900.
yeah, it's Aleppo Codex people. Did you read that book by Mati Friedman about the Aleppo Codex?
Yeah, that was a great book.
So and they were like, what kind of, were they Karaites in Aleppo? Like the people who had the Codex, I think were Karaites.
At some point, I'm sure I don't remember the
And so
details.
they were actually much more, and I think that's where the breaks come from.
Okay,
Because it wasn't written on a scroll, it was written in a book.
Thank you.
okay. All right, so that's our basic question. And with that in mind, let's just go back to our Parsha, the end of our Parsha, which ends with this Vayomer Moshe b'nei Yisrael kol Hashem Hashem et Moshe. And then next week's Parsha, jumping ahead, right? Parshat Matot opens with verse 2, Vayedaber Moshe el Roshei Matot livnei Yisrael lemor zeh davar asher tzivah Hashem. Moshe spoke to the heads of the tribes of Bnei Israel, saying, "This is what God has commanded." And then it goes into the whole laws of Nidarim, of vows. Okay, so that's gonna just that comes up in all the commentaries that we're gonna look at. So it's just important to have that. We're gonna skip to source number 6, and we'll come back to some of the other ones. So source number 6 is Rashi on our pasuk on chapter 30, verse 1. Vayomer Moshe b'nei Yisrael. Rashi says, why, implicit question, why is this verse here? Lahafsika inyan. Makes a separation. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel, according to Rabbi Shmuel, Lefisha ad kan dvarav shel makom uparshat nidarim matchelet b'dibro shel Moshe. Because up until now, we've been hearing God's words, and nidarim, the section of vows, begins with Vayidaber Moshe Moshe Hamatot, begins with Moshe speaking. So we need to make a separation. So we need a separation to tell us that Moshe said this parsha, this section to Bnei Israel. Shim lo kain yesh b'mashma shelo amar lahem zo el b'parshat nidarim hitchil dvarav. Because if not, we would have not been sure that if he conveyed what comes prior, if he conveyed all the laws of the Musaf to the entirety of the Jewish people. So it emphasizes that Moshe told this to Bnei Israel, and then we have a separate beginning of transmitting of laws of vows with Parshat Matot. Okay, so Rashi says that we need this seemingly redundant conclusion verse to emphasize that Moshe indeed did say this to Bnei Israel, and we have to separate between the topic of the Musaf and the topic of Nidarim.
So just to be clear on the Rashi, he's saying that Pasuk Aleph and Perek Lamed is that Moshe tells over the Musaf.
Yeah.
And then starts in the Nidarim. And so Pasuk Lamed Tet from previously, which combines them both, right? Like Nidrechem and Nidvechem, Nidvetechem.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it'll maybe become clearer. It'll either become clearer or more confusing after the Ramban. So let's see which one it
Beautiful.
is. Okay, so he begins by quoting Rashi, and we don't need to read it again. We're going to pick up in this line here, the third line down. Lo hevanti zeh. I don't understand what Rashi is talking about. Shekach ne'amar, vaydaber Moshe el Aharon ve'el banav ve'el kol b'nei Yisrael. Besof Parshat Hamumin. Amar Besof Parshat Hamoadot. Vaydaber Moshe Modei Hashem Bnei Yisrael. He says we have many instances where a section of law is concluded by some verse telling us that Moshe said it back to the Jewish people. So there's nothing unique about what's going on here. Aval Kifi Pshuto Ba Katuv Lomar. So the simplest meaning is as follows: the Torah comes to teach us. Ki afal pisha parsha hazu b'torat hakorbanot lo yiched ba Aharon uvanav kasher hu b'parshat sheb'torat kohanim. Even though this section of the end of Parshat Pinchas talks about sacrifices, talks about the Korban Musaf, it was not said exclusively to Aaron and his descendants. It was not said only to the Kohanim, as we find in Sefer Vayikra. Ella Amar El Kol B'nei Yisrael Yachtav. Rather, it was said to the entire Jewish people. Kechol Asher Tiva Hashem et Moshe. Bein Bedin Shvitat HaMalacha, Bein Betmidin Musafim Unidarim Unidavot. All right. The entire thing was said to the entire Jewish people, whether talking about the prohibition against doing work on the holidays or the various sacrifices or bringing of the other the voluntary sacrifices. It was said to the whole nation. Kichein ne'emarlo, because this is what God said to Moshe, Tsav et b'nei Yisrael. God said, right? We saw that at the beginning, command the Jewish people that this was to be conveyed to the entire nation. Ve'atam mipnei mitzvah la'achar bi'atam la'aretz. V'yazara li'Yisrael kulam she'ishmeru b'moadam hatzmidin v'musafim v'yakrivu ha'nidarim v'hanidavot. The reason is because this mitzvah would become effective once they entered into Eretz Yisrael, and they needed a warning that they should continue to offer and make sure that the sacrifices were offered even on the holidays. A parsha azu shava in parshat hamoadot shebetor kohanim, okay, etc., etc. So right, so the Ramban spells out what Rashi means, that right, this was said to the entire nation. That even though we may have thought this is a Kohen specific law, nonetheless, the Ramban says it was given and conveyed to the whole nation, and it has relevance to them.
Rabbi, is there
Yeah.
any significance to the beginning of a paragraph with Vayidaber and ending the
With
subject
Vayomer?
with Vayomer?
Yeah, so there are commentaries that get into that, the difference between Dibor and Amira, between speaking and saying. Amira is understood to be more direct quote from God, whereas Dibor is incorporating either Moshe's understanding or more bringing in more stuff that wasn't said directly. So there is a distinction that some commentators pick up on. I didn't go that way, but
Okay.
but yes. Okay. So we're going to go back to source 4 of David Tzvi Hoffman. I'm going to give the English and I'll read from the Hebrew. And he's actually commenting. Yeah. So remember, the Ramban said that we have many instances in the Torah where we have this phenomenon. It's not unique to our section. So he's actually commenting on Sefer Vayikra, the first time that we're given the extended section on the holidays, where you can see beginning chapter 23, Vayidaber Hashem Moshe Lemor, Daber Bnei Yisrael v'Mar Lehem Me'odei Hashem Asher Tikru Otam B'Mikrei Kodesh Elehem Moadai. God speaks to Moshe saying, speak to the Jewish people and tell them, these are my holidays, which you should designate in their appointed times. And then that chapter ends, or that section ends, and the chapter, Vayidaber Moshe at Moadei Hashem O Bnei Yisrael, which we say as part of our Kiddush on Yontif. Moshe spoke to about the holidays of God to the Jewish people. So he's commenting here, but right, it holds true for our portion as well. And now I'll show the English on the screen. It's difficult to understand this pasuk in its simplest meaning. Why does the Torah specifically tell us that Moshe gave this law to the Jewish people? We find a similar conclusion in Sefer Bamidbar and Parshat Pinchas, in our Parsha, Ula El, and we find it elsewhere in Sefer Vayikra, HaPasuk HaAcharon Mevuar Kach. So he says this is how we have to understand the concluding verse. Shemoshe Masar et HaChok, Shenitan B'Meisharim LaKohanim, Gam Libnei Yisrael. Moshe gave this law, which really applies to the Kohanim. He gave it also to the Jewish people, to the entire nation, right? Similar to the Ramban. Ulam beParshat HaMoadim me'over sipor zeh simhon. However, when it comes to the holidays, this repetition, this seemingly extraneous verse raises an extra question. Ramban mefaresh ki parshiot shamala azharot Aaron uvanav atzal azhir beit din shel Yisrael al kach. Right, so the Ramban tells us that it's because these laws relate to Aaron that now Moshe wants to make sure that the entire Jewish people hears about it as well. Ulam devar ze nemar kfar b'dibur ha'pticha. However, Hoffman points out this was already said at the beginning when Hashem says Daber b'nei Yisrael. Ve'od harei gam le'el b'sof perek kaf hayat tzarich lichtov siyum zeh. And this should right. It seems like right this redundancy appears elsewhere. So the way to properly understand it is based on the Sifra, the Midrash Halacha, which tells us that Moshe taught about each holiday in its proper time. Right? It wasn't that they were sitting in class in the month of Tammuz, and they got up to the portion which talks about holidays, and Moshe said, okay, This is what the Jewish holiday looks like. But that as each holiday approached, he taught about the holiday in its proper time. And we have a similar, we'll see the Gemara where we see that in a second. Right? So this is spelled out in many places in the Medrash. So based on this, our pasuk is telling us, Shemoshe masar et Torat HaMoadim miyad lachar shekibel otam la'am, af al pi shemutal haya alav lachzor al kol moed u'moed bizmano. So what it's telling us is that Moshe told them about the holiday as soon as he heard it from God, even though he knew he was going to have to repeat it during its proper time. Right, first you have to give a broad overview and then go back as it's coming closer and say, okay, so now that we know there is this concept of Pesach and getting rid of chametz, so now you can flood me with all your questions about do I have to kosher the sink, and what about a granite countertop versus a Formica countertop and all that, right? You needed to have the broad strokes and the details, and that's why David Zvi Hoffman says that it's repeated twice, and the emphasis that it was given to the entire people. Okay. All this is really introduction to this really, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
Meaning that it's repeated because it's once for the overview and once for the...
Correct. Okay. So now Rav Hirsch. Rav Hirsch says something remarkable. Rav Hirsch is commenting right back in Parshat Pinchas. Okay, so the rules for the festival offering, Parshat Pinchas, the end of Parshat Pinchas, chapters 28 and 29, and maybe the first verse of chapter 30. The rules for the festival offering form the last chapter of the actual law giving. What follows is only Parshat Nidarim, right? Mato begins with the laws of vows. The chapter on vows, sanctioning, regulating, and limiting such acts which not God, but we ourselves of our own free will have set ourselves to do or abstain from doing. It is a chapter that the underlying principle of which forms the basis for those bylaws and customs, takanot and minhagim, which have arisen from the agreement and arrangements of the social life of the community, which regulate and ensure. Okay. Our Parsha, Parshat Pinchas, is the end of laws in the Torah. You have, right, Sefer Devarim, we know, it's its own unique beast, its own, right? It's something different. Parshat Pinchas ends the Torah as a book of laws. What we have in Parsha Matos Maseh is not laws in the classical sense of you must do this, right? It's more of a if you choose to do this. So it's, and it's more about the realm of reshus, the realm of discretion, and not something which we're obligated or prohibited to do. Skipping ahead a couple of lines in Rav Hirsch, we believe, therefore, I have it underlined on my page. Where is it? We believe, therefore, that we can recognize in this Vayomer Moshe of Bnei Yisrael, right, in our verse, chapter 30, verse 1, a final sentence referring back to the whole of the law giving. It doesn't relate to the Moadim, it relates to the entirety of Torah as a book of laws. Unless we are mistaken, there is no other occasion when we are told that Moshe transmitted any special law he had received to the people, which is couched in such terms as Vayomer Kechol. For him, the key word is Kechol. Everything, all the laws. Okay, so this is really the end of, not of the Torah, but the end of a significant portion of the Torah. Which, right, where did it begin from?
HaChodesh.
HaChodesh Hazel Lachem, right, the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh. So, right, so if we think, again, there are a few halachot, there are a few mitzvot that precede Rosh Chodesh, which we have a few mitzvot that were given in Sefer Breshit, but right as Rashi, the first Rashi on the Torah points out, right? Breshit. Why does the Torah begin with Breshit, with telling us about the creation of the world? Amar Yitzchak, lo hayat tzarich latchil et haTorah ela mechodesh hazeh lachem. The Torah should have begun with the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh. Shehi mitzvah rishonesh nistavu ba'al Yisrael, because that is the first mitzvah we were given. And if the Torah is a book of law, then it would make sense to begin with the first law. Matam patach beBreshit. So what's the reason that it opens with Breshit? Mishum koach ma'asav yigila amo latet lahem nachalat goyim. She'im yomru umot haolam Yisrael listimatem shekivashtem artzot shivat goyim himrim lahem kol haaretz shel Kadosh Baruch hu bra'a unetana la'asher yashar beinav v'yirtzono netana lahem v'yirtzono netala mehem unetana lanu. So what's the reason that we have the whole story of creation, etc., is that if in the future the nations of the world will come to the Jewish people and say, "You're thieves, you stole this land from the nations that lived there originally," we can say back, "What are you talking about? God created the entire world. God decides who gets to live where, and God has decided that this is where we get to live." It maybe has some relevance to current events.
I have so much to say on this, Rafi.
Yeah. So, but so there is a lot to say on this Rashi. There is a lot to say on this Rashi. I think we've said a lot on this Rashi, and there's still a lot to say on it. But for our purpose now, right, the point of this Rashi is just to emphasize that while we may have thought of the Torah as being a book of laws and only or exclusively or primarily a book of laws, it's not. We have, right, all of Sefer Breshit in the first 12 chapters of Sefer Shmot. We have the conclusion of Sefer Bamidbar, Parshat Matos Maseh, all of Sefer Devarim, that are not part of this section of this extended section of laws. So Torah is something beyond that. It may also be that, it is also that, but it's not only that. And so that's one important thing, is just to think about, well, what is Torah? What is the Torah if it's not only about mitzvos, right? And right, I think I've given classes and, also what does that say about being Jewish, right? Is being Jewish all about keeping mitzvos, or is being Jewish about something more, and something broader than just, narrowly focused Shmirat HaMitzvot? So that's one really important thing that emerges from all this. I'm going to stop though. I kind of jumped into it. What are your thoughts on what Hirsch has to say? Yeah, go ahead, Aaron. I see the wheels turning.
No, first of all, I mean, being a literalist, I love it. I
Yeah.
mean, you had to grab that. Well, what I was just doing is, Avi taught us about the advantages of his friend alhatorah.org, which has a concordance. So I was just looking at all of the other times that the word kechol, asher
Hmm.
tzivah Hashem et Moshe, shows up in the Torah. And I
Yeah.
mean, there are not that many, but because this would have been a beautiful thing to say. This is the crescendo, the curtains are going down, right? That's the way Rav Hirsch is bringing us to this pasuk.
Yeah.
But it's not unique. That phrase isn't unique, though.
Well, he says it is unique in the phrase Vayomer Moshe Kechol. But we have
Ah,
Kechol, right? He says the other uses of Kechol are Vayasu b'nei Israel Kechol asher tzivah Hashem et Moshe.
or kechol, right. No, then that's absolutely right.
So,
So that's when the band strikes up the the recessional where everybody's leaving the theater.
right.
No, I mean, I think it's beautiful. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Um,
How did Rashi and the other guys miss this?
how did they miss it? I guess they weren't thinking this way. I don't know.
Well, this is in Rashi's strike zone here.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a small thought.
Please.
That I was thinking that in a culture where most people would be hearing the text rather than seeing the text, it makes sense that there's an opening phrase and a closing phrase around a section that are very similar, marking the beginning and the end.
Mm-hmm.
So that pasuk that with lists all the different sacrifices performs that function for the closing pasuk. So then this other explanation, it's a very nice way of explaining why there's another closing pasuk
Yeah,
there.
yeah. I mean, it works in a literary culture also, right? We have our bookmarks and our framing motifs. But
Inclusios.
yeah, inclusios. But yeah, it's definitely helpful in an oral tradition. Um, yeah. Okay, so I can't I heard as a lot of car time last week. So I heard someone reflect on this, and his question was, okay, beautiful. Why specifically are does the law if Rav Hirsch if we take Rav Hirsch seriously, why does the law portion of Torah end with with the Musafim? Why is that the way, right? So okay, back up. We've all heard thoughts about why the first mitzvah given was Rosh Chodesh, right? The importance of time. We have our own rhythm of life. We have our, you know, certainly coming from the slavery of Egypt, that we're being told that we have the freedom to set our own schedule. So it makes sense that the first mitzvah we'd be given as a people would be the calendar and to set time. But why would these sacrifices be the final mitzvah given?
Well, in part, it's really the culmination of the transition from Avadim to Am Yisrael ready to go into the land, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we have all of the holidays that really mark time in terms of that transition, in terms of the maturation of Bnei Israel.
Okay.
And, and so
Okay.
at this point, with Atzeret, right, then they're ready to go in.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so he took it slightly different, and maybe I didn't set it up fairly, um, but uh, but he says that the key is earlier on in this final section of laws. We have the pasuk Ulat Tamid Asuya B'Har Sinai L'Reich Nichochi Shel Hashem, discussion of the Tamid, um,
Mhm.
and right
Who
we
is this
have
again?
hmm?
Who is this again?
This is
What's he?
sorry, this is David Miller.
Okay.
He's the Rosh Kollel of the Gris Kollel Yeshiva University's campus in
Beit
Israel,
Vegan.
in Bayit Vegan. Um,
Thank
so
you.
so so he says Olat Tamid, and we have also a Takevas Echad Taseh Baboker, Takevas Hashni Taseh Ben Arbaim. You should write within and write, and the way that our section concluded was this is what these are the sacrifices you should bring in addition to your regularly scheduled programming, right? So he says that this section really emphasizes the notion of timidiyut,
Hasmada.
Immediate.
Hasmada.
hasmada,
Yeah, Hasmada.
um, of doing something, right? We in modern Hebrew, tamid means always, but right, we would translate more as regularly, right? Of having in the way he says, right, that the real thing is not a korban tamid, right, which was the morning sacrifice and the evening sacrifice, isn't about when in the day it's offered, but it's more about the fact that we have something which is done on a regular basis, day in and day out, the continuity. So by emphasizing the continuity, right? And right, just to add Inyana de Yoma, something relevant to this week. We're going to have the Shivas Arba Tammuz fast on Thursday, and so one of the tragedies that happened on Shivas Arba Tammuz is the Mishnah in Tani, source number 13. B'Shivas Arba Tammuz nishtabru haluchot. So that was the day in which the tablets were shattered. Ubatel hatamid. That was the day when the Tamid offering stopped being given, and right when the siege and the destruction was so bad, they could no longer offer the daily sacrifice. And so he says that, right, that's the tragedy. And so the point is that the Torah is trying to make is that we have this notion of tzmidiyut, that we have this notion of doing things on a regular basis. And that should be the bridge that brings us back to the first mitzvah we were given of Rosh Chodesh, right? And to bring us back to Har Sinai. And so we have this, and he says that it's in a very grandiose way, makes either the construct of a klal upratu klal. So all of these mitzvot that were given, right, the bulk of the Torah from HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem until the Tmidim, we have, right, beginning with the klal of, your freedom to establish the calendar, and then ending with the klal of doing everything on a regular, consistent basis, and everything in between is the prat, is the details. But that the essential message is that we need to, we do everything, number one, on a regular, ongoing basis, and number two, right, as we saw much earlier, as part of Klal Yisrael, right? Everything relates to everyone. Right? Even though this was a parsha of sacrifices that seemingly relates only to the Kohanim, no, it was told to everyone because we all have a piece in it. So it's there's more to flesh out here, I think. But I thought that the insight from Rav Hirsch was really mind blowing. Just that we have this division and we didn't really think about it. I hadn't thought about it before, but it makes sense. We are sort of coming to the end. We know that we are, we're now dealing with the second generation, and they're ready to enter into the land of Israel. Right, with with Benot Slovchad in Parshat Pinchas, we had the division and allocation of the land. So we're ready. It is coming to an end. But to think of it in those terms, I thought was really interesting. I thought that Rav Miller offered a really nice spiritual way to make sense or begin to make sense of it. But the fundamental idea that we have this end of the law-giving section of the Torah is something which was quite interesting and quite remarkable, I thought. Any final questions or reactions?
I do.
Yeah, please.
I think from my reading of Devin Miller, and I didn't listen to the podcast, is like he seems to be going past the idea of a korban tamid, as like you said. I think just the way you said it, I think I understand a little bit different but that because these musaf, the korban musaf is a tamid, right? The special tamid for that day, it's sort of, I guess it was a communal component of it, and so that's the continuity. And like continuity means something different than consistency.
Continuity is different. Okay. Yeah.
Like that's
Yeah.
generation to generation to generation. And that's
Right.
why when they would be tell the Tamid, it's sort of this it's almost like a secret language thing. They broke apart, they broke the unity. I don't know. Um, but the other just notable that Rav David Zvi Hoffman, I think, was a student of Rav Hirsch.
Yes.
So
Yes.
just to kind of put them together. That's
Yeah.
it.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Hope you have a great rest of the week. As we mentioned, the fast is on Thursday. We will be having Mincha Minyan in Shul. I forget what time we called it for. Check your announcements. Check your. There'll be many reminders on WhatsApp. And we'll hopefully see everyone again back here next week.
Thank
Have a
you
great
so
night.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lila Tov.